Okay, we are live. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We are joined by Damir at Mysten Labs. He will be covering the Sui Object Display. So this is one of our many workshop series for the ongoing Sui and KuCoin Labs Summer Hackathon. So yeah, thank you guys so much for coming here. We're looking forward to your submissions. We also have office hours available. So if you're building something and you want to get some technical help, you'll be able to find office hours via like the hackathon sign up link, or if you're in the Telegram, you'll also be able to see the link there. And yeah, without further ado, I'll pass it over to Damir, who will go over the Sui Object Display standard. Take it away, Damir.
Thanks for the presentation, Cheyenne. Yes, happy to be here. Today's topic is the Sui Object Display, like a way, show me what you got, basically the way to show what you got in your Move implementation. So we're going to go through some background, some story, why we created display, how it addresses the problems that we face on Sui when displaying objects, when like off-chain representation of what we have on-chain. And we'll start with, yeah, there will be some cool ideas, some application tips, and some future vision in the end. So like if you're thinking to drop early, stay till then, because it's going to be fun, I promise. So we'll start with an overview. Typical NFT implementation, like at least the way we were sort of presented it, or like as we see it, is usually you have some standard that defines what an NFT is. Like historically, Ethereum is the canonical implementation or the canonical standard for NFT, starting with the UC 721 released in January 2018. So there is like notion of ownership. That some address or some account owns this token ID, this like non-fungible asset. And there's usually, not usually mentioned as in like the NFT standard, but there is also metadata standard. Metadata standard defines like what fields the object will have or the NFT has, what are the attributes or like maybe image URL or video URL or what type of content it is, maybe some fancy like tiny details to make it like even more beautiful, prettier when displayed on the marketplace. And so metadata standard usually results in the off-chain representation. Like OpenSea, for example, knows that they have their own metadata standard, and like if you support that, you will get like a decent representation based on that. So there is like a link between on-chain, like the stored URI or the stored URL or whatever, to the off-chain representation. So when we were addressing collectibles on Sui, and it's quite a long story, we had an NFT type roughly a year ago, and we thought originally that there will be like a special type for NFTs, and then we figured and realized that basically because we have Sui object model and objects by default are non-fungible, they're not like coins, they're like just one object. Every object has a unique ID. Every object, it's a platform property, has an owner, be it it can be shared with a logical ownership, it can be single owner object, it can also be an object owned by another object, which is also possible. And every object that's the move property, right? Every object or every struct in move has its fields. So like the only required fields for all three objects is the ID of type UID, but there can be other fields as well, like basically anything that developers or like business wants to see there. And so for off-chain representation, this link between the object in move or like the object as data and its off-chain representation, we create a display. There's also a mention of transfer rules and royalties. There are also NFT like collectibles related, but we won't go over them in this today. So before we get to display, there is one important concept that I believe is important to understand, and it is crucial to support display, to support like most of our collectibles or off-chain or trading commerce features that we have on Sui. And so publisher is an object, is a special object, which has a very simple API. Basically, you can claim it using a one-time witness in your module. And then you can check, once you have this object, you can check whether this type, like just passing the type as a type parameter to the signature of the functions from package or from module, you can check whether this type belongs to the module or belongs to the same package from where this publisher was created. How do we know that publisher is correct? Because we supplied one-time witness. It can only be created once per module, multiple times per package. Same goes with publisher. And so we know that publisher was created once for this module, but maybe multiple times, like multiple different publishers for the same package. This is also possible. And the simplest use or like the simplest application of the publisher object is just claim and keep. So basically, to have display, to have transfer policies in the future, to be able to trade your assets or display them nicely in the ecosystem, you would usually want to have this single line called the Sui package claim and keep, because this way the sender of the transaction, the publisher of the package, will get the publisher object, and it will unblock and it will allow for display functionality, which we will talk about in a bit. It will unblock transfer policies and potentially some other applications, like say there can be a marketplace where you can prove that this NFT type is actually yours, and they can give you like some special functionality for it. So the interface is that simple. Initialization is also pretty straightforward, and with that being said, we can get to display. So display is, first of all, it's a library. It is located in the Sui framework. The address is Sui, 0x2 display. And it has like some features that allow us to define the off-chain representation of objects existing on Sui. But before we get to the actual details, let's look at the sort of the background that we had when coming up with display. Worth noting that we did not come up with everything of this, like of all of it on our own. There were some attempts to create standards for metadata in the community, and we appreciate them, such as like the capsules approach. We were partially inspired by this one. So just saying that like this idea was out there, like in different implementations, and different people wanted to get to pretty much the same point given the object model. So starting with like typical approach to metadata on other chains. So usually you have like a hash map, basically like a map where you store the token ID and owner, maybe like a reverse. And usually you would have a token ID map to metadata URI or like some link or some address of IPFS or Arweave, or maybe like a typical Web2, but usually you want it to have immutable. You want to have an immutable link to the metadata. So we have a centralized storage. Typically in Ethereum, because every smart contract is a singleton. So you just publish like a huge map where you define that all of these NFTs have like this metadata is like assigned to each one of them. So all the JSONs, all the data is stored off-chain. And the problem here is that, if you just like try to map the same approach to Sui, where we have objects, so we could define an object that has a metadata URI, and we could even say that, hey, this is like OpenSea metadata because we agreed to support OpenSea for some reason. And when you create this object, given that transaction finality is almost instant, or like transactions go instantaneously and you get the results like right away, you don't even feel sometimes that transaction went through. How do we link this action to like some off-chain publish somewhere else? In most of the situations, like to have the best user experience, for example, you go to SwiftFriends and you have like one copy and you have another copy, you want to mix them, and you want to get another copy. And so if copies had no struct fields and they only had metadata, there was like no display, no image, no whatever, you would have to wait until some off-chain worker will like see that there was new copy and it would publish the metadata somewhere else. And so it just kind of doesn't match like the object model and what we have here, because we also have scrub fields, right? We can utilize them and we can use them. One note on the metadata standards is that, I mean, who controls the standard controls the NFTs, because we know about OpenSea because they have metadata. We know about Metaplex or some other standards because they set the standard. And one thing on standards, we will get to it in a bit, is that we intentionally are trying not to set the standard. First of all, because it is a very like serious move to set the standard. And secondly, because we don't know what we will see on the platform in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, and preemptively setting some standard and committing to it and like forcing it, that saying like, hey, this is how things are done from now on. This is not our approach. Our approach is to give a tool that allows for multiple standards to exist. So metadata challenges on Sui, I mean, I've already, briefly explained. So like, since every object on Sui is an NFT, like attaching a link to IPFS into every object, like it works, but it is pretty complicated when we're mixing copies, when we're minting something live, like super fast, or when we have dynamic NFTs and they change. We also want to, we're still on chain, right? So we don't want to put all attributes, like all the data we can possibly imagine, all the static data descriptions, maybe like actual images. We don't want to put all of that into the object. So we still need to remember that ideally we want to store only unique and only usable data on chain. So everything that's not usable, it still should go somewhere, like, but maybe not on chain, into every object. And one complaint that was pretty harsh, maybe like almost a year ago, when there were many articles comparing Aptos, Sui, Solana, Ethereum, and like other blockchains in regards to NFTs. Given that everything is decentralized and we don't have a hash map like in the middle, which defines the metadata for each token ID. If collection mint went wrong, is there a way for creators to fix it? Given that I own my object, I own my copy, and there is no way for anyone to basically access this data and change it, even though they say that they made a mistake, and like maybe I want to do it. I may want to do it myself, but they won't be able to do it like automatically. And so we faced a set of requirements, such as like metadata. First of all, metadata is a pure off-chain problem, and we need to solve it somehow. Like, we're solving off-chain problems. This is important to remember. But we also need to use the data that is stored on-chain, and usually we want to store like less data. We want to store the unique and usable data, the data that can be used in different applications, and not like some maybe something that is not valuable in the context, or like repetitive data. We also want the publisher or the creator to be able to fix the metadata if something goes wrong, or maybe like to update it eventually. We also want to give creators to choose their own metadata. So like, be it OpenSea, be it Aptos metadata, be it Metaplex standard, like whatever, they can come up with their standards, and we don't want to set it for them. And we also want to be able to upgrade the metadata eventually. So like, even if there is some like notion of standard or some fields that feel they're standardized, we want to be able to add to these fields. And so with off-chain storages, it's going to be like quite complicated to like patch this collection, then another collection, then another collection. When we want to add something to the standard. So like, it is going to be painful. Or we imagine it could be painful. And so, yeah, tell me you have a standard without telling me you have a standard, and we are introducing display. So couple properties of Sui. So every object has a type. And so when thinking like what is an NFT or what is the current collection, like in the display scenario, we define a collection as a type. So for example, like we have Sui friend and then the type parameter copy. And so the Sui friend copy is sort of like collection of Sui friends or collection of copies. So we can just use the full type as the collection identifier. So when addressing the problem, we're addressing it not for a specific object, but we're addressing it for a type because we have the system property. And we can define an object that would, we can create an object that would define how this type is represented, how off-chain applications, how wallets, explorers, marketplaces, you name it, display this specific type. And we don't want to store too much data, and we can use templates. And if this object was owned by the creator, they would still have the way to update the display later on, maybe fix the display, change the description, like change some parameters, extend the metadata later on. And we also want to support versioning, and we also want to have like changes to be committed sort of instantly or at least announced to everything on chain in one transaction without overcomplicating, like updating every object, if it's possible, of course. And so we came up with a very simple approach. So basically, if there was like some Paris NFT and it had some parameters such as ID, maybe like a level you can upgrade your bear, or maybe it's just like this or the level they were born with, or IPFS URL, or maybe, I mean, some link to some image, or maybe a bear has a name, we could utilize all of that, and we could add some like extra metadata on top using like a simple sort of template for the object. And so if you look at the template that we see here for object, I mean, display for bear, you would see that the description is static. The URL is sort of static, but in the end, we insert the ID. So like the curly braces, they are the syntax for inserting fields of the object. And so for the full node, it's drastically simple. If they can fetch the display template, because to the right we see the template, and they already are fetching the object, I mean the full node is fetching the object, we can kind of map them together and return in a single response without even overcomplicating the sort of backend fetching, like unnecessary queries, fetch this and fetch that. So we can do everything in one place. And we don't just cover the objects, the NFT objects, we also cover utility objects. For example, like if there was a marketplace or like generic marketplace, like set up your own marketplace in 2 simple steps, we could create a utility object, which would have a very nice description, a link to like go to our project and like here's your marketplace that you're managing, and like here's the standard image URL. We could easily imagine the same pattern being mapped to event tickets. For example, we could have like the link to the specific event, or we could have a description like, hey, this is the event ticket for the event that's happening on, and then like insert the string date or maybe like format date in the future. So all of this is possible, and we don't just constrain ourselves with the typical NFTs, like what we imagine as digital content, like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, the punks, or like fudgies on Sui. We also can cover the capabilities or utility objects or event tickets, or maybe it's I know, like usually you would want to have it for capability. And so metadata, from being like a large chunks of data stored off-chain, because usually it's repetitive, usually the format is the same, the like the video encoding, the image format, everything is usually the same, and we basically turn it into a single on-chain object which contains the template and like all of the NFTs, like in their like aggregated size, off-chain plus, I mean on-chain plus off-chain, they turn into something really small, and they store only unique data which identifies the specific object or is used or is necessary for this object, which makes it unique basically. And so if we look at the display object, it is that simple. So it has an ID because it's an object. it has a phantom type T, which defines the type for which display is created. So like for SwiFriends, it's going to be like SwiFriends copy. So display will be for SwiFriends copy. For our bear, it's going to be display bear. Inside, it has fields. Fields are a simple web map, string to string. Left is keys, right is values. Like the left part basically like results in the JSON as keys, and the right supports displays and like fills in the template if it's possible. And so the version, we also get version for being able to version the different displays. So like I can have my first version of display, I publish it, then I modify something, and for example, I have version 2 and I have version 3 for people who want to iterate. But this also gives us a way to be able to query like, hey, give me display version 1 for this object, because maybe for some reason I'm not interested in version 2. So the API reference for the display object is also just as simple as a publisher one. You create one, this time not with the once in witness, but with the publisher. That also means that you can create as many display objects as you want. It's just, it won't make much sense to do this. So there's a whole bunch of different like fields work in it. So you can multi-add names and values, you can change, you can add, remove, modify, like basically like working with a back map. And finally, we have the most important call, which is listed first here, the display update version. So when you call the update version, your display version gets like sort of taken, like the contents are copied, emitted as an event with the version, and your display version gets bumped. So like this way, this way we get like, hey, the new display for SwiFriends, updated version 2, boom, now we have it. Without calling update version, like until you called update version, no one gets, no one can read, no one even knows that you created the display object. So, they can if they track something, but it won't affect any off-chain representation. And so there is also, here's a way to initialize the display in the module initializer. You see the publisher being claimed like via the package claim. You can claim and keep, but you can also just get it. The display is created for the type defined in this package. Using the publisher, context is required to create a new object. And then here's like a simple API where we add to display, like the name is, in this case, origin byte kiosk. The link is like leads to originbyte.io, etc., etc. And what is important here is that like we update version. So the update version call is also performed here, and the display is kept in this case at the sender address. So you can burn it, but usually it wouldn't make any sense for you to burn it, because you would still be able to recreate it if you own the publisher. But if you don't own the publisher nor you don't own display, that will be like set in stone. No one will ever be able to change that. As long as you own display, you can modify it, you can upgrade it, using the same update version syntax. So Object Query API today supports the show display option. So you can use this option to return the display for the given object if there is a template. Otherwise, if I'm not mistaken, it returns null for it. So we try to make it so that clients can just like use whatever is defined on chain, whatever was emitted by an event. So full node does everything for you. You just fetch the resulted data, the process template, and you have it settled. Yeah. So there are limitations because the display is per type, including. We're just like starting. It's just the first implementation. It hasn't really been updated since some time before mainnet. So currently, display only is one per type. So there is no way to, for example, define a generic like container, even though the type definition is like container T. There's a whole number. There's a whole set of approaches of the ways how we could approach this. But we just haven't gotten a chance to get to it just yet. And also string to string structure, because it's a backmap string, makes it tricky. to define like the attributes list with like keys and values and etc. and etc. So there will need to be some consensus on how this attributes or maybe enums could be added there. So it's more like a moment of silence for me to grab a water. But also on this slide, you see how the display results in the copy. I hope the image like is big enough, but basically on the details tab, you see the process display. It's the left screen, and below the attributes, they contain like sort of a debug view. I mean, so display is similar to like cross display trait, and while the typical struct is like the debug representation. We need, I mean, before we get to like ideas and fancy parts in regards to displays, one important note in standards. So as I mentioned, we don't set the standard with display, and it is very intentional. And we want, I mean, so basically we have a suggested set of fields like image URL, we have the name description. I mean, basically pretty obvious, but we're also trying to suggest, for example, expires at. Important part here is that we have suggested set of fields. So there's no obligation coming from anywhere to be like, hey, dude, you must support this specific field. There is no must. Like, you are free to do so. Like, if ecosystem decides that the background, I mean, that they want to have a new field, such as like here the background URL. Like, if creators are interested, if ecosystem is interested, usually it's not creators. We know it's usually launch pads or maybe marketplaces that like run launch pads. If they like this idea, if they want to support it, like it will exist within this segment of the ecosystem. They will have the background URL while like maybe sharing the rest of the fields with like other parts. And so de facto, like the background URL, if it gets enough enough support in the ecosystem, becomes like part of the standard. And it's really easy to even track like which applications support what. And maybe like there could be some agreement between like wallets or between explorers or between marketplaces and dApps on which fields they're interested in introducing. I mean, currently, like Mysten Labs was certainly in the position where everyone expected us to set the standard and give like definitive answer, like just one answer for everything. Like, please set the standard, but like we're intentionally avoiding it. We only support what is necessary today, and we only suggest the fields that are necessary today. It is also possible that like some project will use display for their own purposes. So they can define fields which make sense only in their application, or maybe they just like the way, or maybe they just want to, they're hoping to like support these fields, but they can start with their own application, and then maybe some wallet will start supporting it too, and so on and so on and so on. So like again, no standard, only suggested fields. It is flexible. You can always upgrade your display later on. So like no commitment just yet. And so with display, you get this chance to like to upgrade, to change your mind, to follow some new idea, and maybe even support multiple standards at the same time. So getting to, I mean, this is the fun part of the presentation. It appears to be very short because the topic is so simple. I'll just leave them, I think, here. Like if we're gonna have the questions session, then I'm happy to like elaborate on them a bit. So first idea is like you can always patch the display. So like whenever you change the display, it gets updated instantaneously. It's sort of like the basis of the display. So on one hand, it's great because if you have a bug, you can fix it right away. On the other hand, if creator is like sort of, I call it creator terrorism. If creator is pissed or like they want to troll their community and they turn like all of their NFTs into like poop emoji, this is doable as well. And so there will be some maybe like, interaction between creators and the community. So the community would demand that like, please lock the display or like give it to us, or maybe like discard your publisher, but we'll get to it in a bit. So another idea, for example, you could have a gallery NFT. I think there are projects like on other blockchains that already do that. So imagine like you have an object which is basically like, it does not have a static representation, so you did not buy like a monkey themed NFT, but you bought like sort of a placement in your wallet and you just enjoy this NFT. And the creators, and the creator is not like a single creator, but like people vote for art, people offer or suggest their art, like other people vote, and then there could be a process set up because display is programmable, just as everything else on chain. I forgot to mention that like the programmability of display is like one of the important properties of it. So by voting mechanics, you could add a new field, you could upgrade your display, and therefore like the gallery NFT would show you, for example, like a new NFT this week. And the next week the voting goes on, happens again, and people vote for something else. So like it could be seasons, it could be daily, whatever. So any programmability is possible for metadata, which is, I believe, fun. So ads. I had this idea with ads. So imagine like your wallet is basically like, and your inventory is your fortress. Like no one can take anything from you. Unfortunately, some scam projects can transfer something to you, and like this is the system property. Like they basically give you the object, and so it's now yours. So it is possible to have like sort of legal or formalized like advertisement NFT. So you could have an NFT which is like a placement for ads, and so there could be like an advertiser that maybe sponsor a pool of rewards for people who hold the advertisement NFTs, and the link on this NFT, because like as part of it, suggest the link property, or maybe like there could be like a fancy link or ad link or something. It could even use the object ID of the NFT, of the ad placement. And so whenever user clicks on it, like they like what they see, they click on it, the advertiser even knows like which NFT it was clicked from. So just saying, like you can build URLs, you can like have this sort of like share ID and other properties on chain, like if maybe someone is interested in having something like that. So as I mentioned, there is a place for creator terrorism. Some people might like get a hold of display, but then they're pissed at the marketplace or the launchpad that they're not getting royalties or something. And as long if they have display for other types, they can do whatever they want. And so maybe there once will be a case. And we intentionally don't have set any protections, because if we set like some access control, it may not be convenient for some applications to be implemented. So like the intention here is to have it as programmable as possible, but this also comes with like functionality is kind of like outweighs the security from out of the box. So like some security mechanics could be implemented by the community, or maybe like there could be a tweet like when I burn my publisher object, so I cannot change it, and then there could be a tweet. I now burn my display first, and then my publisher object, so I cannot create displays. And then they're like, no, you can still upgrade your module and you can have a new publisher object. And then the creator is burning their upgrade cap and saying like, all right, you got it. I can't change anything. Like this is the situation. You now have what you have. It will never change. Like this is set in stone. So display is not metadata. It's just a template engine which allows you to have a nice off-chain representation linked to, which uses the data on-chain. And when we were brainstorming the bridge implementations, say there's like some bridge company that wants to bridge an NFT from Ethereum to Sui, or from Solana to Sui. Like usually these NFTs have their data standard. And so it is possible that they will just have like OpenSea URI, or they will have like Metaplex URI. And in the display, you could define even like the base type of it. Like, so if there is OpenSea metadata, like add the OpenSea metadata into the template. And so we could even aggregate all of them templates, all of them existing metadatas into the display. And so it's like, it's not one or the other. Display can include OpenSea metadata as well. Like basically any APFS link to any metadata with specification. I would assume that people want to specify which standard exactly they're following. And so there is also like this use of display as a tool. For example, today you can Move does not support strings. I mean, string operations. I mean, it does, right? You can just like concatenate two vectors, then turn it into a string again. But it's not convenient because it's just like the language is slightly about something else. But sometimes you want to work with strings, and you, for example, can concatenate strings. You can even build today like an SVG, which like uses one field of the object, sort of like opening SVG tag, and the closing SVG tag. And you could even build a template which uses like different fields, like as sort of different parts of the SVG, and you could patch like certain aspects, like certain fields in this SVG. It could even, no, vector, it can't yet be a vector, but it will be able to. I mean, so we'll get there eventually. So sometimes, like, I have this example here, like there is, I mean, if you're building on Sui, you probably know that if you use show content, it is often painful because you're like results dot data dot contents dot fields, then like this field, and if it's nested, then again fields, and etc. 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 So this is very painful. But like if using display, you can basically like just use the nested paths. We support the path syntax through the dot, so it's gonna be like basically the same thing you see on the screen. So it's gonna be like my object dot like nested field dot something. So this works. You can slightly optimize front-end queries already, and instead of querying, for example, the show contents, if you don't need it really, and you just want to read something nested in it, you can just use it in a display. So display can do a faster queries for you, or like just optimize queries as a tooling mechanic. So future, what I've just told you is a pretty raw technology. We got it in. It serves its purpose, but there are only a handful of fields. The adoption level is still pretty low. There are still projects launching without display. For example, without like publisher, or maybe some launchpads don't give the display object to the creators. And so ideally, I mean, in the future, like the adoption level will increase, like people will want more from display, and we have a sort of long-term vision for it. For example, like today, often, I mean, sometimes you want to have like an optional, like, is there an image URL, like optional image URL? You will get nothing if you try to use an option, but maybe like if it's not set, I want to say like, hey, this field is not set just yet, right? So like we want to have some support of like different data types that we have, like insert default value if option is none. That's a very legit request, and we will eventually address it somehow, like in one way or another. Dynamic field support. So as I mentioned, like everything happens in a full node, and querying an object and querying dynamic fields is a pain. Like if you're building on Sui, you know that you need to do this request. Like for example, give me this dynamic field. Constructing the struct may also be like quite painful, although we improved the RPCs a bit. I mean, a lot, literally. And so it would be nice to be able to fetch dynamic fields and then go through, for example, if the dynamic field is a struct value, or like if it's an object, you could go through the contents of the dynamic field and like have it all as a sort of like decent tool processed in a single template and like in a single RPC request, which is give me, I mean, query object or like get object with display. This would also enable larger, for example, dynamic SVGs or dynamic images, when you could have like a larger SVG as a dynamic field, and then another SVG as a dynamic field. And then you would be able to construct bigger images, or like play with it even more, like if you had support for dynamic fields. Also, table and bag, they're basically like just special cases of dynamic field support and dynamic object fields. Vector indexing, it is often, again, the case. You just have like an attributes vector, like 0 means like with friends. They have the attributes field, which is a vector of their like traits or attributes, the resulting values, but without keys. And so like vector indexing would have been a great feature of display for Sui friends. Enums. So like if you have if you are optimizing for gas, though you may not want to do it like too early because the gas might be still cheap enough. So like if you're not using the full string values, and if you're just using like U8 as sort of enum indexing, like hey, I know that this type maps to this, display could help with that. We're looking at different solutions on how to address enums. And finally, the case that I mentioned in the limitations, that you can't define like the display for a basic container. For example, like there's, let's say there's an escrow contract and like there's like some object locked in it. You want to say like, hey, this is escrow contract. And inside, like you want to use the image of the inner something. So like it would be great if display supported nested like contents display inheritance something, or maybe like if not that, but the base display that if there is no there is no special display for container copy, like fall back to just container and say like, hey, this is the container with something. Some applications already appear. I'm super grateful to Ethos for having the display editor in their like sort of Ethos apps, their fancy application, their website. So like you can basically imagine that creators or like even developers may want to use just simple like UI tools for fixing display. So like here you could change the name of the project, or maybe you could add a new field to the display, and it all is easily represented in a simple UI. Perhaps there could be like an extra validation or like some hints like, hey, this is a valid template syntax, although it's just two curlies, but like you forgot to close the curly. That would be great. Like if some applications or some projects launched with features like that. But it's already like an amazing job that performed by Ethos. That's like the first display editor you can actually see and play with. So if you're building something, if you already have a display, you can just like patch it right in the UI, which I think is great. I'll leave a spoiler to the next week. So like there will be a notion of a very important topic of which we call kiosk, but this is it for the display today.
Cool. Thank you so much for your presentation, Damir. This was awesome. I hope you guys learned a lot. I know I did. And yeah, this video will be on our YouTube channel immediately. Someone in the comments did say that like they wanted more videos like this. So yeah, this will be on our YouTube. And yeah, thank you again so much, Damir. And yeah, have a good night, everyone. Or at least where I am, have a good night, but have a good day, morning, wherever you guys are. Bye.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.